In the beginning, there was only chaos. A fiery, swirling mass of gas and rock, storms and molten rivers, forming a young Earth in the void of space. Lightning crashes across primordial skies. Volcanoes erupt, the planet cools, oceans gather, and life slowly begins to stir. In that timeless silence, the first fragile shadows of humanity emerge, curious, vulnerable, but already conflicted. From the moment humans walked the earth, they were not alone, not just in nature, but in conflict. Small tribes, scattered in valleys and hills, struggled for basic survival: food, water, territory. There were no kings yet, no empires, but in those early years, fear ruled. Fear of the other, fear of scarcity. The earliest wars left traces: bones with arrowheads, mass graves that speak of violence. This was not conquest. This was survival. Centuries passed, and human society grew. From small tribes came permanent settlements. Villages became cities. In Mesopotamia, in the land of Sumer, people built walls, temples, and fields. But expansion brought rivalry. The Sumerians and the Elamites clashed, the first recorded war. They fought not for glory, but for resources, for control of land and water. War was born from necessity. As civilizations flourished, so did their armies. In Egypt, kings declared themselves gods, riding chariots into battle. At Kadesh, Pharaoh Ramses II faced the Hittite king in one of history's greatest ancient battles. Thousands of chariots thundered across the plains. Spears flashed in the sun. And yet, despite the carnage, the two powers eventually negotiated the first known peace treaty, a landmark in human history, showing that even in war, diplomacy may prevail. Meanwhile, across the Aegean, the Spartans stood firm. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans held off a vast Persian army. Their shields, their discipline, their courage, they became legends. They understood something deep. Peace may demand sacrifice, and sometimes the few stand for the many. Their story reverberated through the ages, inspiring others to fight not just for land, but for their freedom and moral dignity. Then came Alexander the Great, young, ambitious, and fearless. He carved his way across Persia, Egypt, and beyond, forging an empire that fused cultures. He spread not just conquest, but ideas: Greek philosophy, science, art. In his wake, cities blossomed. The world grew smaller. Through war, he bound distant lands together, showing that conquest can also bring connection. Next came Rome. Disciplined, powerful, almost unstoppable. Roman legions marched in perfect formation, building roads, aqueducts, walls. Their power was not just on the battlefield, but in architecture, law, and governance. Slowly, they stitched together an empire that stretched from the Atlantic to the deserts of the East. They brought order, and with it, a time known as Pax Romana, 200 years of relative peace. Through those centuries of peace, trade flourished. Ideas spread. Engineers built grand monuments, poets composed epic verses, philosophers debated under open skies. The Roman world seemed unshakable. But peace, as always, carried its own fragility. Corruption crept in. Borders became hard to defend. As the empire stretched thinner, internal division grew. And eventually, that great machine began to crumble, not from outside alone, but from within. With Rome's decline came a new age, the medieval world. Castles rose on hillsides. Knights took up their swords. Religion, power, and conquest intertwined. In the East, within the Islamic world, scholars gathered in centers of learning. They studied mathematics, medicine, astronomy. Knowledge bloomed in places like Baghdad and Cordoba, even as empires expanded through war. To the west, the Crusades raged. For 2 centuries, Christians from Europe marched to the Holy Land. They fought to control ancient cities, to claim religious honor, to defend ideals. Horses thundered, swords rang, banners flew. It was brutal, bloody, and uncompromising. But each battle also opened doors. Ideas traveled, trade routes shifted, cultures collided. In war's terrible fire, new connections were forged. And then came the Mongols. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan, they swept from the steppes, ruthless and agile. Their horse archers, their lightning campaigns, seemed unstoppable. Cities fell, kingdoms trembled. Yet, under their vast empire, the Silk Road prospered. Caravans crisscrossed continents. Goods, ideas and people flowed. In their rule, war and peace danced together, conquest and commerce. The Gunpowder Age dawned. Cannons boomed. Fortresses crumbled. Empires adjusted. The Ottomans, in their great power, deployed gunpowder to expand. In Europe, kingdoms built navies and musketeer regiments. The world became more connected than ever. Ships crossed oceans, colonists landed on distant shores, trade networks spread in every direction. 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, exploration brought hope, but also exploitation. New lands were claimed, new peoples encountered. European empires spread, not just by force, but by ambition. Forts and trading posts sprung up. Wealth flowed, but it came at a cost. Local populations were subjugated, cultures disrupted, and conflicts born anew. War was no longer just a tool of survival, it was a tool of power. Then came the 20th century, and with it, the most catastrophic wars humanity had ever seen. World War I erupted in trenches that stretched for miles. Soldiers lived in mud, under constant bombardment. Poison gas drifted through no man's land. Millions perished, not for territory, but for alliances and promises. Yet the end of that war did not bring lasting peace. Instead, the world plunged into another hell. World War II. Total war. Dictators rose. Genocide spread. Bombers scorched cities. And in the final hours, the atomic bomb dropped twice, forever changing the face of war. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, humanity witnessed that war could threaten its very existence. In the aftermath, the United Nations was born, a fragile but hopeful experiment in global cooperation. Nations came together to promise, never again. They pledged that war should no longer be humanity's first answer. Through diplomacy, through dialogue, through institutions, we could aim for peace. But peace did not mean the end of conflict. The world entered a new kind of struggle, the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union locked into a silent duel. They did not fight directly, instead, they built arsenals, spied on each other, and backed proxy wars in distant lands. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, the battlegrounds lay far from their capitals. Nuclear missiles sat in silos, pointed at civilizations. Paranoia reigned. Propaganda spread fear. The threat of mutual destruction kept the peace, but it was a peace born of terror. People lived under the shadow of annihilation. And yet, diplomacy survived, treaties were signed, summits held, and the world avoided a direct nuclear war. As the Cold War thawed, a new era of conflict emerged, one without mass armies. Modern warfare changed. The battlefield became digital. Drones flew silently overhead. Hackers broke into systems. Satellites watched every move. Intelligence agencies fought in cyberspace. The nature of war evolved, but human stakes remained. Conflicts in this new age were not always about land. They were about influence, ideology, and technology. Nations clashed over data, territory in the virtual world, and power in global networks. Drones could strike without warning. Cyber attacks could cripple infrastructure. The new wars felt invisible, but their impact was very real. At the same time, the old wounds of war persisted. In regions across the globe, in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, conflicts flared. Ethnic divides, political ambitions, historical grievances, they all fueled violence. The world watched, intervened, negotiated, and sometimes failed. The promise of global peace remained fragile. Yet even in this era of uncertainty, there is hope. Humanity stands at a crossroads. Our future is not predetermined. We have the power to choose. Will we allow war to define us? Or will we forge a new path, one shaped by dialogue, cooperation, and shared destiny? Every generation inherits the story of conflict. But they also inherit the possibility of peace. We rebuild cities from ruins. We negotiate treaties. We send diplomats. We invest in education and global institutions. We remind ourselves that war may test our strength, but peace defines our character. In the next decades, our greatest challenge may not be how to win wars, but how to prevent them. Climate change, resource scarcity, ideological polarization. These are new battlefields. Our weapons may not be tanks or bombs, but innovation, empathy, and wisdom. 2300 to 2400. Imagine a world where peace is not reactive, but proactive. Where nations invest not just in defense, but in diplomacy. Where young people learn conflict resolution instead of war strategy. Where global institutions work not just to respond to crisis, but to prevent it. That world is possible. For 5,000 years, humans have repeated the cycle. War builds. War destroys. Peace rebuilds. Peace inspires. War returns. But the cycle does not have to repeat endlessly. We can break it, not through force, but through unity. War may test humanity, but peace defines us. The future is not written in blood, but in the choices we make. Will we continue to fight? Or will we choose to build a world where peace is stronger than war?